Welcome to Honor Your True Story with Antonia Nelson, a podcast dedicated to sharing inspiring stories of hope, kindness, love, and compassion. Listen in as Antonia's guests share pivotal moments, forks in the road, ups and downs, and wisdom earned on the road of life.
This is Honor Your True Story. I'm Antonia Nelson, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Sharon Palmaville. Sharon is a seasoned, results-driven program director, highly regarded for her 11 plus years of work with nonprofits and NGOs, working with the vulnerable populations and the social issues at grassroots level. Sharon also has been on the Kenosha County Board. And today she's going to talk about what it was like growing up in a household of cult extremists. So welcome, Sharon.
Hi, Antonia. How are you today?
Good. I'm so glad you're here. And I wanted to kind of preface your introduction here is that I've known you for over 20 years and pretty well, and I had no idea any of this was going on.
Yeah, the cult belief is, you hide it. You are the number one thing on the planet, but you have to hide it and not let anybody know. That's kind of the belief system behind it, because then you hide everything that's wrong with it, and we do it under the guises of this is the best way. It's just bullshit. So
yeah. So how old were you when you had an inkling about this? How old were you?
I was born into my family. There was 3 cults that they were a part of. So I was born into it. So I thought it was just kind of how everybody grew up, and this is how life was. And I don't think I really grasped what I was a part of or what I grew up in until I was probably mid-adulthood. Yeah, otherwise I just thought this is how life is and this is normal. And I'll have to say, when I said the word normalized to my therapist, that kind of opened the floodgates. It was a good clue for her that, okay, so what are we normalizing just to be able to live?
Yeah, I'm wondering, as a kid growing up, especially when you get to the school level, was there any things that you realized well, we don't do that, or I don't believe that, or any of that growing up?
There was a lot of things that my parents said, these are things we do and these are things that we don't do. And I didn't realize that it was all connected to the cult beliefs. I just thought, oh, it's our family rules. This is how our family lives and this is what we do and don't do. So some of the don't do's would be drinking. I mean, this is kind of the craziness of it. You don't drink, you don't do any drugs, of course, but you can eat an unlimited amount of candy bars. I mean, there's really no rhyme or reason to, we would never go to the doctor, but we went to the dentist every 6 months. They were just adamant that my parents were that we would go to the dentist every 6 months. But if we could go our entire life without seeing a doctor, we've done a good job. There was just such craziness to it. And I did realize as a child that I didn't quite speak the same language and I didn't have quite the same freedoms as my other classmates did. So I noticed even in hindsight that I was kind of gravitating toward the other kids who also were in cults as they were growing up as well. And I just thought, oh, well, they're just religious and that's why we get along. But it was the fact that it was all of the similar cult behaviors.
So your cult radar kind of thing, right? Yes. I think when you've gone through something, your system has a radar where you kind of can pick it out when you're in the proximity of it again. So what were the other kids? What was the sign oh, they're like me kind of thing? What was the signal to you?
Oh, I think it was just probably more subconscious because it was the kids who just didn't quite fit in with everybody else. They had maybe a little bit odd behaviors. There's things they could not do. And so I'm thinking specifically about my one girlfriend who was a Seventh-day Adventist. So that, and then there was one that was a Jehovah's Witness. And so both of those have very strict beliefs. And so like, oh, there's my team, right?
Yeah.
There's the people that are similar to me, the ones who can't do everything and have a lot of restrictions.
Yeah. Did your parents grow up in that kind of life as they were children?
My mother did, but my father didn't. He grabbed onto both of these cult groups when he was in his late teens, early 20s. And again, came from a super broken home. So, when you have nothing as a home, you're looking for your family. And so oftentimes that's how people who are in cults, and you're wondering why are you there? There's this longing for family, and sometimes cults will provide that.
Sure. So you said your mother did grow up in a family of cult behavior.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
My mother did in a more traditional one that most people wouldn't think of as a cult. But now, many years later, and much therapy and a lot of reading and a lot of learning, like it was as common as it is, it still is cult behavior. And it's hard to say that to most people because the cult that she's a part of is very mainstream. And so to call them a cult would be such blasphemy that
and whatever you're comfortable about talking about, let's go there. And when you're not, please just say so. So I just want, the questions that are coming up. So what are some of those cult behaviors? Like now, where you are now, you can look back on that. Like, what were some of the cult behaviors?
Some of them would be like, you're not allowed to do certain things. Like, you're not allowed to travel certain places, wear certain kinds of clothing, go to certain schools. You're not allowed to take on certain professions. There's all these, well, you can do this, but you can't do that. And they limit you on how successful you can become.
Wow.
They limit your successes. And so by doing so, they keep you in a place where you're still tied to them with limitations. And because of those limitations, you can't leave, because that's the rub, right?
Sure.
We keep you limited, which keeps you tied to us, because if you were too successful and too free, you wouldn't stay.
So you said different professions you couldn't go into.
Oh, correct.
Like what wasn't okay to get into?
Anything where you could be wildly successful.
Really?
Yeah. So if you were too successful financially, too successful politically, they really didn't want you to succeed beyond them. And so the more you could stay a little bit under your capacity, then you still needed them, the cult. And so then you'd stay. So like, you couldn't say become a wildly successive Wall Street investment banker. That would just be absolutely not allowed, because that would be of the devil, or that wouldn't be quite pure enough, or there's something bad attached to that. They make up some crazy story about why you can't be successful and still make it to heaven, right?
So as a kid, like, I know you're wildly creative now. I mean, I know, knowing you, I know that about you. What did you think about all that? Like, so what did you think about, like, what you wanted to do as a kid? What was,
what
you had a wanting to do?
Yeah, I was an actress, and there was no way that was ever going to be allowed, because we couldn't watch movies. Here's another one. Can't watch movies, but you can watch cartoons. Can't go to the doctor, but you can eat unlimited candy bars. Like, you can't do that. It was so subjective. They would just kind of make up the rules as they went along. And so as a kid, to be super creative, that was just not necessary in this lifetime. Nobody needs to be creative. It's nuts and bolts, get her job done, hard work, heaven or hell. It's going to be one of the two.
So did you get a chance as a kid to play, or what was your day like as a kid?
Yeah, so interesting enough, I have one sibling, and she kind of had pretty much a more free reign about how she was going to live her life. They really liked her in a different way, treated her differently than they treated me. So for me, they were a little shunning. So both of my parents, in order to be a part of, I think, of a cult this long term, there's also some mental health going on. And so I still am trying to pick through what was the belief systems, the cults, what was mental health, and what was upbringing for my parents, because they all kind of blend together. But for my sister, they really liked her a lot. For me, not so much so. They really kind of wanted me out of the way, which was probably the one thing that gave me the freedom to actually move about. They just wanted me home at night before it got dark out so I didn't get hit by a car. That was their kind of be home before dark so you don't die, right? And so that gave me the freedom just to run and go. And by run, I mean, you can only run so much when you live in a really rural neighborhood. So I spent a lot of time with my friends and my friends' families and riding a bicycle and just hanging out any place I could, just to be away from them, to have some freedom to think and breathe and dream.
Yeah. So do you remember as a kid with and I'm not sure where, like if there were cult meetings or how this came about, but like within the indoctrination, did you find there was any part of you that was going, oh no, this is BS, or no way?
I kind of always felt that, because the two main cults that my parents were a part of were very at opposite ends of the spectrum. One was extremely conservative and one was way out there. And so as a child, I was always trying to figure out, how do I combine these two into some sort of beliefs for myself, which was an impossibility. And so it always felt kind of bullshit, because one of them was telling me, this far end, super conservative beliefs, and then the other far end that, we're all made out of volcanic dust and we came from an explosion, and UFOs are the mothership and those type of things. And so there was never any ability to look at all of them and think, oh, this all works. It all just seemed kind of crazy.
Yeah. And did your sister kind of have that same feeling?
She leaned more towards my mother's end of the kind of the conservative belief system. I think it was just an easier one to grasp out of the two. And she stayed with that one for her whole life.
Okay. Did your parents stay together for their, no, I'm just curious.
No, not at all. I think they made it about 20 years and then got divorced. And then there's a whole nother layer of stuff you have to try to understand and figure out. Now you've got divorced parents trying to kind of pull for your affections and your allegiance, and it's pretty impossible to do so.
Yeah, how was that? How did you respond to that?
I realized when I got in my 20s that I was going to have to break some ties with them in some fashion. I either have to join forces or break some ties. And I did it in a way that I didn't even realize it until I, really looking back at the things I did in my life and why. I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing, but I was making very specific decisions about where I was going to live and who I was going to be with and what I was going to do. And I knew that some of those decisions were completely against what my parents would allow. But I also knew that that was my opportunity to do something wrong, right? To do something wrong, and then they'll disown you a little bit, which gives you the freedom to start to live your life a little bit.
So when did you leave the house?
18. As soon as I could. I remember as a child trying to figure out, how do I get out of this home? How do I do this? I lived in a very rural area. There was no public transportation. This was the 70s. There was no way to get around. There were no social service providers. There was nobody at the school that you could talk to about whatever, what's going on in your life. There was nothing that teachers would look for. They would have never known. They would have said, oh, she has strict parents, or she has parents who are, religious. And so that's why she is the way she is or does what she does. But here now in these times, in 2022, those things my parents did would have been punishable by law. But back then it's just, oh, she's fine. She's getting fed. She's got a place to sleep. She seems okay. That's good enough.
So the day you left, how did you get out of there?
I was working and I was making about $3 an hour. And again, in a way to keep you connected to them or to keep you from having any freedom, I was working actually for my mother. So my mother was my boss. So she would determine, your hours, and she'd determine how much you get paid. And I just got to the point where I just had to go. And there was this really tiny rooming motel in this very tiny town. I mean, the town we lived in had 1,000 people. So it was very rural. And there was this tiny rooming hotel. And I just remember leaving and thinking, I'll figure this out, making whatever it was, $2.97 an hour or something at the time. And the rent was, I don't know, 30 or 50 bucks a week. I thought, I'll figure this out. And I just left, and they never came for me, right? They never came to look for me. They didn't try to talk to me. They didn't want to make sure that everything was okay. They didn't, you would think a parent would come and try to take care of the child, but they're like, oh, well. And I remember them saying that, oh, well, she's gone. And then they kind of washed their hands of.
Did you ever get a chance to get any of your stuff?
Yeah, they were pretty much okay with that. They were happy if I'd come and get my things and leave. And the worst part, I would say, of it is they really kind of handed me off to, you have to realize, like, you have no strong, clear, or healthy emotional boundaries. And so there was a gentleman who I knew, who was not a good human being, but he's like, hey, I'll take you away from here. I'll get you out of this situation. I get money every week. He was on unemployment. And it looked like to me it was the only way to get out. I mean, how else am I going to get out? This is the only opportunity where anybody has ever said, I'll get you out of there. But he was also just like my parents.
Well, I was going to say, was he part of the cults too?
Yes.
Oh, geez.
Yes, just a different one. So again, you're resonating with people who are thinking or believing or have similar belief systems to your own. And so he was a really just awful human being. And I thought, well, this is better than where I'm at. And at least I'm closer to being free of people controlling where I am and what I'm doing and who I am.
So how long were you with him?
I was with him for about 10 years. And I just remember the day when I could feel like something wasn't right anymore. I didn't like what I was doing. I didn't like where the relationship was heading. I wasn't happy. I could feel myself getting less and less freedom to learn and do and explore and make friends. I could feel it all kind of shutting down again, which is what people who don't want you to go anywhere will do. They'll just make your circle smaller and smaller and smaller. And I could feel that happening again. And he said to me one day, we were standing in the kitchen, he said, so how are we? And I just remember somebody flipped the switch, right? And I remember saying, we're not. And I thought, holy shit, I'm free, right? We're not. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. And I want a divorce. And he's like, well, this, whatever. And it was about a year later that I was divorced, and on comes trying to raise 2 children with no education, no circle of friends, no family, being raised with these very restrictive beliefs that limit your ability to be personally successful, because that's exactly what they don't want you to be, as successful. The more successful you are, the less you need them.
Right.
So it's always to keep you a little bit under the weather.
So when you left, did you have any contact with your parents or with him? Did he want any contact with the kids?
So one of the things, he really didn't want contact with the kids. He really just wanted to continue to keep tabs on me and to, again, make sure you don't thrive. Because as soon as you thrive, you cut ties with people who never let you thrive. And so people who are in cults or people who are trying to restrict your movement will always try to keep you tied to them. And so it became this process of becoming free. And that came through work with the courts, it came through work with counselors, good friends. I would find myself doing things that my parents and he specifically were completely against, because if I did these things, they'll disown me and then I have my freedom.
Yeah.
So I caught myself starting to do the things that I know would really piss them off the most. And it might be something as simple as listening to music. I remember buying some beer one time and I had like a 6-pack of beer in my refrigerator for about a year because we were raised not drinking. So it wasn't normal for me to sit down and drink a beer. So I had beer for when other people came over. I started to date cross-culturally because I knew that would really just infuriate all of them across all levels. And it was a way for them to say, all right, we're going to wash our hands of you for a while. I'm like, yay, please do. And so it was just a matter of doing all the things that I was never allowed to do, which were just very normal human experiences, like dating and traveling and eating and drinking and listening to music and enjoying yourself as an adult human being.
So what was the sense, or how did you know you were, I guess the word that comes up for me is safe in you and your new life, to be out in the world? When did that happen and how did that look like? I know you said you had counselors and friends, and but do you remember, was there ever a moment where you kind of had that realization that that's all behind me kind of thing?
It got better. Like every year that I was divorced, it got better and better, since I'd gotten the divorce. And there was at some point where with my children's father, he was very messed up as well. And I was able to get the courts to step in and not allow him to have unsupervised visitation with my children. And when that came, well, I'm just going to back up real quickly. He was just very adamant that he didn't want me to have any of his money when we were getting in the middle of the divorce. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I protect my children from him the most? Like, what could I do the most? And the thing that I knew at that point would be to get sole custody, because that was a big deal. In the 80s, you could have shared custody, you could have sole custody, or you could just, I don't even remember what else there was. But I kept thinking, if I had sole custody, then I wouldn't have to ask him every time I wanted to make a decision about school or doctors or medical care, or that all that would be kind of out of the way. So when I was in the last meeting with the attorneys and him and I heard something say, offer to forego any kind of maintenance support for the sole custody, because the maintenance was going to be very brief, even though I had no schooling and no job to support children. Even back in the 80s, you'd get a little bit of money for maybe a year and then you're on your own, figure it out, right? So I thought, well, if I forego this maintenance, that'll give him money that he doesn't have to pay me, but I'm going to trade it for sole custody of my children. And he took it instantly. So at that point, it was just one boundary after another that I was able to put in place to keep people from harming me and my children. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was a really smart decision. And then yet, here, like you said, you're this young woman with 2 little kids without schooling at the moment. And, that's a lot to navigate, and no family support.
None.
Yeah.
Yeah, no family support, just what kind of girlfriends and my girlfriends, I made a lot of friends really quick because all of a sudden you're normal. And it's easy to make friends when you're just kind of living a normal life instead of always speaking some cult language or trying to find people who believe just like you, who had no freedom in their life. So yeah,
So
with
good
that,
gift to give your kids, right? That they didn't get that passed on to them.
yes.
Yeah.
But the thing with the cult stuff, it still is in our family dynamic. And even though my father has now passed, my sister has passed, my mother is close to passing, that cult dynamic is still moving because I perpetuated it, because that's what I was raised in. So now it's my job, I believe, to, bring as much freedom as I can to my children and my genetic line at this point, free from those cult beliefs and holdings.
Yeah. Well, and I know through, how I've known you with a lot of the work you've done has been doing that over the years, that you have been doing that.
Yes.
So what's some of the wisdom that has come out of this? Because I'm imagining the lessons and the learnings that you have gotten through all that you went through.
I'm still kind of in the midst of it, honestly. There's a lot of unwinding to it, because you come to the place where you say, okay, is this what I believe? Or is this what my dad taught us? Or is this what my mother's beliefs were? Or is this what my children's father's beliefs were? So there's this dialogue almost all the time of, is this me? Or is this something else talking right now? It's not too hard to figure it out, but you just have to be mindful that, well, this doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Like where does this one come from? So that constant unwinding, and there's also a lot of self-forgiveness, because we have, as being raised in these 3 cults, you take on those beliefs and you pass those on to your children, and it causes them suffering and, discord and making their own poor decisions. What feels like a poor decision, when you're on the outside looking in. But at the same time, we all come here with our own lessons. So my whole question for myself is like, why did I choose this one? Like I didn't ask that question yet, but I definitely will at some point. Like, why such a difficult upbringing? Because it really does permeate everything for pretty much the rest of your human life.
Yeah, well, that word freedom comes up for me when you talked about that, early on,
Yes.
right? Of being so many of the situations where you didn't feel free.
Yeah, and I wasn't.
Yeah, you weren't. Yeah.
Oh, just were not at all. And how do you find your freedom and then live your life?
Yeah.
So
How you did find your freedom. You left the family, then you left the husband, and so
I just kept looking for somebody or something to tell me, like, what's going on? Because none of it makes any sense. All the cult beliefs and all that dogma, none of it makes sense in this life. So I kept saying, I need somebody to tell me what's going on. Like, explain, what is this? Tell me what this is. Why is this? Why? Because they teach you the opposite of the truth. And so it's always this, is this the truth? Is this them? Is this what's actually going on? Have I created this? Is this just some, goofy thought that I have in place just to be able to navigate my world? And so it began with friends who had some ability to navigate similar things that I was going through. So I would try to find friends who were more skilled at those types of life, upbringing or situations. And I remember too asking for a therapist or a psychologist or something. I'm like, I need somebody. And I remember saying this over and over again. Somebody tell me. I need somebody to tell me what's going on. Like, explain all of this to me, because I couldn't figure it out. And I was physically not feeling well. And that's part of the cult upbringing as well. I mean, it impacts you physically over time. It'll impact you more and more. Really, here's the body keeps the score. And that's definitely something that happens in a cult upbringing when you've been so harmed, emotionally harmed for so long. So the body was starting to be impacted, definitely, like emotionally and psychologically. That's just super messed up. And so I finally find a therapist who said, hey, let's talk, and she had plenty of experience with people who been raised in cults, and was able, just like piece by piece, we've been going through everything. And I had no idea when I started working with her that I was even raised in a cult household. Like, that's how much your parents would hide it from you about everything that they did, everything they inflicted, and then what you were actually a part of as a child. They hid it all. Don't tell anybody, don't show anybody. It's better that they don't know, because then whatever, we're freer, we're stronger, we're safer, or whatever they might have twisted it as. And so with this new therapist, we just piece by piece started to unwrap. And I'm in my 7th year of unwrapping 50 years of being, held back, lied to, abused, misused. My parents were, they don't really, how would you put it? For me, I don't know about my sister, but for me, they really didn't care a whole lot if I lived or died. And so to kind of have to unravel that as an adult and figure out why was that, because there's a part of you that would take it personally when it never was. And that was one thing that they worked hard to do, is to blame you for everything. And the more they blamed you for it and told you it was your responsibility, the more you would not talk about it because it was shameful.
So it sounds like this therapist has been a real gift for you in your healing journey.
I would have never been able to do it. Yeah.
And I love that you're, 7 years in and you're still giving that gift to yourself.
Yeah, it's not been easy either. It's been, it challenges everything you've ever thought, believed, hoped for. You have beliefs that you thought were true and they're not at all. And so to repattern and recreate, what is true for me in this lifetime has been a lot of work. But what else is there to do, right? It's this, keeps you going and extends my life and my well-being. And if I didn't do it, it probably would have I'm pretty sure I would not be here right now. Like, that's how much it impacts your well-being.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And who I do know of you, of what I've seen, over the last number of years, what you have been doing, like for work and in your life, and really awesome things. And I know your work, you're very successful at your work, and you have a big heart and committed to really helping the populations and the businesses connected with it where you live. I mean, it would, like you said, there's many things that you could do when that loss of hope is there. And you didn't. You channel that into your work, I'm thinking.
I think that was part of it. And I could kind of go head first and maybe even go overboard just because I could. And it was my life. And my parents were pretty much out of my life at that point when I got to more of this stage, maybe hit, that late 40s, early 50s. And, I could just do what I wanted because I realized at that point, no matter what I did, they were going to be unhappy. If I made too much money, they were going to be unhappy. If I was too successful, they were going to ding that somehow. If any successes were met with, oh, why did you do that? I thought you were. And so, yes, I remember one time saying I had an Obama sticker on my back door. I think this was the first time he was running for presidency. And I thought, this could be interesting, right? So I had this little Vote Obama sticker on my back door, and my mom and my sister had come over for some reason. It was a rare thing that they would come over, and they pointed at the sticker and they said, "Are you voting for him?" And I said, maybe, because I realized, oh, this is a bad one. They turned around, they walked out of my house, and they didn't talk to me for 3 months. And I'm like, well, this works.
Wow. Yeah, that works good, right?
Buying beer works, voting Democratic or whatever it is about that they didn't like. I've realized I either can tell them what I'm doing or tell them nothing. And so I kept my life to myself.
And how did you get into what you're doing? Because I know it means a lot to you, and I know it means a lot to the people that you work with. What was the pull?
So in 2008, we had a pretty big recession here in our country, and it took many years for our economy to recover from that. And I got laid off, I think, at the end of 2008. And I thought, I'm going to take a couple months off. I'd never really been laid off before, and I had worked many jobs all at one time to make ends meet, and I was a little tuckered out. And so I thought, I'm going to take a couple months and just collect unemployment. I'd never done that before. And as I did that, it turned into like 4 years, and I actually called it a sabbatical because it just was more than a couple months. It ended up being many years. And I thought, oh, this is my first opportunity to volunteer, because I could never do that because I was too busy working and I had kids. And so I remember there was this one nonprofit that was near us, and I tracked them down. And when I went to meet with her, the director, I said, I'm looking to volunteer. Well, by the end of the conversation, I was on their board. And I'm like, I've never done this before. And I tried it for a little while. I didn't like it. I'm like, yeah, this isn't for me. And so I left, but I made friends with some of the board members. And the director, about a year later, the director had left. And they asked me if I was interested in the position. And I said, no. And then they asked me a couple months later, and I said, no. And they asked me again, and I said, no. And they said, well, how about if you just come in and do a project for us? Because I had my own consulting business at that time for nonprofits and for artists. And so I took a couple month consulting project with them. And 2 weeks into it, the director left. She's like, I'm out of here. And they're like, hey, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I said, well, I'll stick around, because they just leased a new facility. So I said, I'll renovate the new place and move the agency and get it up and running, and then we'll talk. And this place was a resource center, crisis center, food pantry. It's like a hub of services in a very rural area of Kenosha County. So I'm now in my 11th year there. Every year I was there, got better and better. I realized how I could make a difference, how I could be impactful, working on a policy level, both in Madison here in Wisconsin, as well on a national level in DC. So I do a lot of policy work too. And then just work locally to just try to, decrease poverty. So that's
awesome work that you're doing, for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And then you decided to go on the county board.
Yeah, I was a little bored, and I thought, well, there's got to be a different board out here that I could be a part of as well and still do my regular job. And this opportunity came kind of quickly, a few days within when we needed to file paperwork for, and I kind of sat with the thought of it for maybe a day, and I'm like, yep, this is this is something I want to try, and got elected as a county board supervisor here. So we worked actually through the pandemic, which had not started when I put my hat in the ring for this. So I had no idea we were walking into 2 years of a pandemic and civil unrest here in Kenosha County, which most of the world knew about, where we had a lot of buildings that burned down and people that died. And so that's where all of our meetings were at, where all that civil unrest was going. So for our meetings, we, drove into downtown Kenosha and met when all that was going on. And it's very tragic. And there's good things that have come from that pressure of so much tragedy. We were able to get everybody, outfitted with body cams, which none of them had here in our county. So those body cams are now county-wide, both for the sheriff's department and our prison systems, and then for our Kenosha City Police Department. We put together a historic racial equity board for our county as well. And this was, through the prompting, because we have the George Floyd killing that happened a few months prior to everything happening in our city, and definitely part of what prompted that. And so those are a couple of really big things that now racial equity is really being looked at and examined, and kind of going deep to see what Kenosha County needs to do to, as much as possible, decrease.
Yeah. Now, are you still on the board?
I chose not to run again. I did
Okay.
a 2-year term, and then I chose to not do a second term. And
Yeah, 2 years is a big deal.
that is a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big commitment.
Yeah.
And do you notice, is there a noticing of things being different in Kenosha? Is there a feel, have things become different at all through the things that you've instituted, like you said, with the cameras, with the police, and with the social equity? Does Kenosha feel any different? I'm just curious, because you live there.
Part of what I saw when I was on the board was a mirroring of our national politics being brought in on this really, just on a county level. So those positions are supposed to be nonpartisan, and they have become fully partisan. They're not supposed to be, and it is a nonpartisan position, but that doesn't seem to be how the position is viewed anymore. So they're very partisan at this point. And yeah, like I said, what I see happening nationally has been brought in onto the county level now. So even though you have the wins, but you also have a lot of pressure to do things in a partisan way.
So what is ahead for Sharon?
I don't know, but I also know when things complete, because I feel like there's things completing, like even this kind of washing the hands thing. I just know when things complete, and a couple of them complete almost on a similar timeline, I know that there's something else coming. So I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I look forward to it. And I look forward to seeing, what is life like kind of post cult, and how does that wrap into, the next 10 or 20 years of what I do. There's a part of me that just wants a free life and free of the cult stuff, but at the same time, it's your expertise. So how can you do some of it without having to live it for another 20 years? That's the part I don't want to do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds exciting. Like you said, that you're not sure what it is, something
Yes.
is coming, and how you will meet that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just encourage people, anybody who's just curious, like, was I impacted by my parents', belief systems? Were they a little extreme? Was there this is the other piece, like, what part is their own mental health? What part was their own mental health challenges? What part was the cult beliefs? What part was their own craziness? And where do all those pieces lie? And so that's the other piece that I continue to unravel. And I really don't think most people could do it without somebody walking them through the process of it. So anybody that's even curious, I highly recommend that they find somebody who's got some expertise in helping people who have left a cult or are still in it and wanting to leave, because it's very insidious on how it like works into your whole belief system and your thoughts about who you are as a human being. And that's probably the biggest thing is cults want you to take the blame for everything. And it's actually, most of cult belief is the opposite of truth. And so that's the unwinding. It takes some time, and somebody you trust who will say to you, that's not true. And I'm like, really? And they're like, really? Yes, that's not true. Can we look at this belief that you're responsible for everything that ever happened to you in this lifetime? Because it's not true. There are things that other people did that are responsible for that. But if they make you responsible, then it frees them from taking ownership for the things they've done in their life. So it's a matter of freeing myself and putting the onus back on people who need to take responsibility for the things they've done.
So a good suggestion for anybody who has been through a cult or thinks they might have been is you talk about really finding a good counselor, therapist.
You'll love it.
Yep.
It'll be the best thing you ever did when all of a sudden you get your freedom, you get your mind, your thoughts, and your heart back, and you get to allow people to become responsible for their own shit.
And I'm imagining not just any therapist or counselor, but to get somebody who has some experience working with cults or all that kind of stuff.
Yes, because
it's going to take you farther, I would imagine.
Because then it wraps into, mental health. It wraps into domestic violence, which is always wrapped in there somehow too. And then there's just, cult belief runs the gamut of all the, possible hardships a person could experience. And so somebody with that cult experience you will be so happy.
Yeah.
You took the time to sit down and find your freedom.
Yeah, because you pretty much got at least 18 years of indoctrination.
Yes.
In those very formative years where your brain is just soaking all that up. So
yes,
you've got a lot to, like you said, to unravel and unwind. And it's not something that you probably can do by yourself.
No. Mm-mm. What I found when I was trying to do that is I would just find more cult people or more cult beliefs or something, because you're patterned a certain way, and that's what you keep looking for.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, I hope you will come back in the near future when whatever is like coming to you, comes to you, and you can share about that. I'd love to know more.
Yes, I would love to. Yeah, there's been a lot. And the piece about the cults is just even that recovery piece. It's just a very interesting process. And I wouldn't be surprised on how many people that that maybe listen to your podcast that don't even realize how much a cult belief has impacted them in their own.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, thank you for being here, Sharon.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for all that you shared and being so vulnerable about telling your story.
Thanks for listening to Honor Your True Story. If you loved what you heard, please share this podcast with a friend and be sure to subscribe, rate, and review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in.